Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session on the final day of the Breaking Barriers Symposium. My name is Dana Blackwell with Casey Family Programs. I lead our work here in California. Today's session will focus on understanding the experience of system-impacted individuals so that our path towards transformation is appropriately informed and guided. Before we get to our panel, for those of you who aren't familiar with Casey Family Programs, I'm going to share with you a little bit of who we are, and then we'll get into our conversation. Casey Families Programs is the largest national operating foundation focused on safely reducing the need for foster care in the United States. We have formal agreements with 50 states, 10 of which, with 50 states, including the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, US Virgin Islands, and multiple tribes across North America. In California, we work with 10 counties and the state as a whole. Our mission is to provide and improve and ultimately prevent the need for foster care. And we envision a nation where communities provide the support and opportunities every family needs to raise safe and happy children. This is a tall order, to be sure. And as an organization, we are always thinking about what will that look like? How could that look in communities across the country? We know that there are communities that are marginalized. Certainly, the pandemic has shown to us the inequities in our system. And so we have really thought about, again, what would that look like? For us, that has come in the form of what we call building communities of hope. It's about transformation, sustainable, long-lasting transformation of the child welfare system into a true child and family well-being system. Transformation is the operative word. And what we have today is not what we want for any of our children and families tomorrow. And so this session, I think folks expected me to talk about equity and how foundations and collective impact could build towards equity in our system. And certainly equity is important. Again, this pandemic has only surfaced the need for equity and racial and social justice in our system. But equally as important, if we are truly going to get to a transformed system, we have to honor and listen to, be guided by those who have experienced our system. And so for me, having that conversation, presenting those ideas to lead us towards transformation, I think is what is both foundational and really important. We have to walk alongside folks. And so with that, I would like to introduce our panel. Bob Ruble is an uncle, caregiver, and advocate. Roger De Leon is a parent partner and bio dad. And Katarina Kabick is an MSW, youth organizer, and former foster youth. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen so our presenters can be more forward on the screen. And the first question that I'm going to ask is a question that I'd like all of you to respond to. So we'll start with you, Katarina. I know, Katarina, you were having some trouble, so can we do a little bit of check? Can you hear me? Great. I see you're off mute. So the first question, and you'll start, Katarina, is when you think about your experience with the child welfare system, what are some of the specific experiences you had that you wish would have been different? And again, all of the panelists will respond to that question. Katarina?
Yeah, so I actually spent a lot of time in congregate care settings. I spent a lot of time in congregate care settings, and I think this is important to note because I think the lack of access to healthy relationships, both long-term and just the opportunity to learn those relationship building skills, really impacted me over my lifetime. And one specific experience that I wanted to share with all of you is when I was around 17, I entered a new group home. And at this point in my life, my whole world had changed. At this point, I really decided to focus on education. And I was really determined to go to college. I was applying to many colleges all over the country. I got into many prestigious ones and I ended up graduating eventually. But at the time, you know, I was entering this group home and my case record in foster care wasn't a great one. I was just trying to do the best I had with some really awful circumstances, right? So a lot of the behaviors that I was exhibiting were really just pretty much a normal response anyone would have to their world falling apart every day, right? But I was just kind of seen for those behaviors. So I got to this group home. I had all these textbooks in tow. I was taking classes at a community college, and they asked me when I wanted to take my GED test. And there's nothing wrong with that, except that they weren't asking me what my educational goals were. And it felt like they just didn't see me in that moment. They didn't see that I was a scholar. They didn't see that I had all these aspirations. No sense of that, right? And that's because they didn't see me as a whole person. They had my case file, right? And the problem with that is that a case file doesn't take count of photos or certificates from teachers in kindergarten or championship trophies from Little League. A case file doesn't remember you in the way that a parent can, right? A way that a family does. There's no hallway gallery of photos in the case file. And the problem with that is not just that the people around you start to see you through that lens, but also that you start to see yourself through that lens. So this is why I really value relationships and am passionate about creating opportunities for young people to build relationships and not just be in placements, right? But be in homes with families who can invest in them in this way and remember them in these important ways. So that's the experience that I wanted to share with you all as they start to like think about what's important and what makes a difference. It's really relationships. It's really believing in young people's whole selves, and it's focusing on transformative experiences and like every day is a new day, right? And that you can remember someone instead of saying that they were disruptive during a meeting, you can remember that that's actually advocacy skill, right? In the strengths-based perspective that I was the disruptive young person, and then I went on to have a very successful career in advocacy. So that's how I wanted to start and share all that with you.
Thank you, Katarina. I think your experience reminds us clearly that in looking and working with children, we have to think of them in the whole, right? That it's not a year, it's not a case file, as you said. Roger, can I go to you now?
Sure, that's fine. Of course, I am a biological father, biological parent who has navigated child welfare system. And so what I would have wished to have had happen back when I was going through what I was going through was that I wish I had somebody that was there to be able to walk alongside me and give me just information on what I was going to be facing. The time, this was 10 years ago when we went through what we went through. And so my story begins with my wife being falsely accused of child abuse. And so with that, I was charged with failure to protect my child. And so basically what took place after that was that in a span of 2 days, the first day the accusation came, I saw my wife being hauled off for an accusation, and I seen my child being hauled off as well, and I was left alone. You can just imagine the heartbreak and just the pain that was there for being accused falsely. And even the investigation wasn't done properly. And I know that now today. But if I would have had somebody there to help me navigate, to help me understand what would have taken place, what my rights were, things would have been a lot different. And so having lost my family, the next day I lost my job because I left early because of this whole situation. And so it just went from bad to worse. And I can honestly say, without the support of my church and of course my faith, I don't think I would have survived it. It was just hard to be able to go and try to find guidance to be able to understand what was happening. And so with understanding this, the way that it was done was we were told, well, on the court report, it was said that we didn't have proper, sleeping arrangements for my child. And it also said that we didn't have any food in our cupboards. But the problem is that they never stepped foot inside of my apartment that I had. And so, and of course, at the time, I didn't know what was going on because I didn't understand. So we were trying to prove our innocence. And so we were just trying to figure out what was going on. And my wife she was falsely accused, and it did not happen. And so with the individuals that we knew, I had a friend who basically went to vouch for me. And what was told to him was that the decision has been made already and that it couldn't be changed. And so, just having to go through that and not knowing what was next and not understanding about court, walking in and walking out and not knowing what just took place. It wasn't until somebody, it was actually a lawyer, shared with me to just allow the process to go through it and just to see what it looks like, and if I felt like it wasn't being done right, to go back to him. But he was honest with me. And so once that took place, my wife and myself, we jumped on and started to do everything we were supposed to do. And so when that took place, we actually reunified with my daughter in 4 months. And so the case took 8 months, so 8 long months of agony. And looking back at all the things, I didn't understand why it happened. I didn't understand, why us. I wasn't on drugs. I wasn't on, drinking. But I do understand that things happen for a reason. And so years later, here I was the first parent partner hired for the Riverside County and able to build this program from the ground up. And so what I would have loved for to have had was somebody there by my side to explain things, to guide me, to let me know what my rights were. But at the same time, I'm grateful because today I am that person. I'm able to do that with parents, but especially with fathers. And so I want to end with this. One of the things that myself and my wife, what we've learned to do is to forgive and to forget and to go on. And so I'm not here on a revenge rage or anything like that. It's how we can go forward. But the story I want to share is that one day I was doing a presentation for father engagement with another individual, and I shared my story. And the individual that was right there, that had caused the whole thing, the social worker that was right there, and at that time, which was over 10 years ago, was sitting right there. And so as I shared my story, we kind of looked at each other and, kind of felt like we knew each other. But when I was done, she was the first one to tell me, "Thank you for sharing your story." And for me, that was an apology. Even though I wasn't looking for that, that was an apology. And so I can honestly say that, Riverside County has come a long way, and the fact that I'm able to do what I would have loved to have done in the past, or had done for me, is powerful. But we need more of it. We need more of it throughout the state. So thank you.
Thank you, Roger. And I can only imagine both the impact on you, your family, and your daughter during those months, and also the impact on the social worker when she heard her story, right? It's your story, but it was also her story as well. So thank you. Bob, how about you as an uncle?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I come at a little different angle than Roger got involved with this. Both of us never probably expecting to have any of this knowledge. So my journey begins with me trying to protect my niece. I finally had enough. One day I was over where my sister was living, who was with my father, and I found some heroin-filled needles on the bed, but they were both sleeping. And as I tried to retrieve them, my sister and I had a little bit of a tussle, so to speak, and the police was able to call the police, and they obviously arrested my sister. At that time, it was just going to be a drug thing, but unfortunately, my cute little 8-year-old niece, who I barely knew, come running down the street crying for her mom, seeing her mom in cuffs, her mom cussing and all that. The police department decided to take her in as well into protective custody because she was coming back to the home where my sister lived with my father. And they ended up taking her in to a congregate care place we have here in Orange County. It was called Orangewood at the time. And as it all settled down, I thought, you know what? I just did a great job. I'm going to go home. I'm going to relax. Immediately the next day, my phone started ringing off the hook. I got a call from the diversion unit telling me that basically I was the only one that they would allow for my niece to come home with. And if I was unable to do that, she was going to stay in congregate care for a couple more days and then be placed in a unfamiliar foster parent home. So my wife and I at the time decided that we would go ahead and do that. We would take her in, and they came the next day. They did the house assessment, and we took off and picked my niece up. Then the next day, the phone's going off the hook. I got people calling. I got somebody telling me this children's lawyer. I've got investigations. I've got mom calling from jail collect. The only thing I had, the only knowledge I knew at the time was a placement agreement, and I hate to use the word placement agreement, but that's what it's technically called, that said, you're going to have her till she's 18, and you're going to help with reunification. Well, obviously, reunification at the beginning is not the best thing in my mind, so we ended up working that out. But what I feel bad about, or what I really wish would have happened, is I didn't know who these people are that were calling. I didn't know if I needed to talk to them or what my rights were or what I needed to do. I didn't have, as a male, because my wife was working out of state at that time, trying to take my child to school and giving them paperwork so mom doesn't get out and come take her. It just was a difficult thing as a male to go through. But the whole time I thought, you know, it would have been really nice as I look back that somebody could have just come alongside with me about 72 hours later, you know, give me a chance to get her some clothes, a good night's sleep, get her stabilized a little bit, and just tell me, you know, kind of another person that has been through it, that's lived through it, what to expect, what to go through, what you're going to go through, and how best to care for your child, because that to me was the most important thing. So I'm a big advocate in peer-to-peer type of support, because I think that's good. You got agency people with badges and official titles and names and people calling, and it's a little intimidating at the time. So I wish there would have been something in my case in the process that would have helped me along the way, at least at the very, very beginning, before the dust even settled. So that's
Thank you.
kind of my compact story.
Can we stay with you?
Sure.
Because you helped to encourage the development of the First Parent Partner Program in Orange County. Can you tell us about that and the impact of that?
Yeah. So as time went on, once I started to get a handle on the situation, understand the system a little bit, I needed some help. So I was invited to go to a relative caregiver group session. I'd never been to anything like that before. I actually felt a little ashamed that I was going there for help, because I felt, I'm a man, I can handle this. But it was really encouraging. It was really eye-opening to me, because when I walked in and sat down in a big group, which at that time I was the only male in there, a woman came in a couple minutes late and sat next to me, and she just started crying. And I said, "What's wrong?" She says, "I never knew that there were other people in the same situation as me." Just the fact that she was sitting there with other people that were also struggling, trying to figure everything out, really hit it home for me. It I almost started crying, because we all felt like a relief of there is the support, but it wasn't anything direct from an agency. It was something that was done by an outside agency. So after that meeting, I think a couple of us stayed in the parking lot and talked for almost an hour, because we wanted to talk about things that we wanted to talk about, not what the agency wanted us to know. So at that point, as time went on, I went back to the county and started kind of voicing my opinion, and we tried to. I came up. Well, I'm sure it's not the first time that anybody came up with the idea, but I was really encouraging what would have helped me, what would have done. And I said, a peer-to-peer, an orientation, something. So we kind of developed that with a little bit of my input, the much that they would let me do. And we had a first trial one, and I got myself invited. I wasn't invited because technically I wasn't a county person, but I got myself invited, and there was an aunt and an uncle there. There was a grandmother there, and then there was a teacher that was bringing in one of her students. And they went through this presentation to everybody, and we sat there, and then at the end they asked, "Is there any questions?" And none of the other people asked a question at all. And I'm thinking, we're going to leave here, and I mean, I've got a million questions. So I took a stab at it. I threw, what about visitation? And then the floodgates opened. Everybody started asking questions. I think we were there a whole nother hour, and then we were ended up in the parking lot again. And I thought, there's just no other way to be able to communicate and connect with people if you're not doing it, or you don't have that lived experience. And that, to me, is why I believe it's so important to have that, so that it can prevent, any bad placements. Let's just say, I hate that word, but it could also help with reunification, keep families together if it's done early enough. I think it just has a huge, uh, it really have a huge input to the process and the well-being of children and families, if it's implemented statewide. And I know we're working on that in the state, and it's coming up, but it's just,
Yeah,
I just can't say how important to me that would be.
right. The isolation and the trauma of the isolation, right?
Right.
And not really feeling empowered to participate in the process in a way that gets towards the outcome you're looking for. Roger, you're a dad. You were a dad going through this systems. What are some of the examples or changes you've seen when fathers are included? And how do you understand the impact of that for kids and families?
Okay, so just like I shared before, I navigated the system, but I also shared that I am a parent partner with Children's Services for Riverside County. So I have the privilege of being able to walk with parents and share with them in their trauma, being able to relate to them and help them. And so I can think of a couple of stories, because I work a lot with dads. And so understanding them, I can bring up one individual in particular, just thinking about him. Just how when I first met him, when I was introduced to him as his parent partner, just all the dysfunction that was all over, but also the bias that he had to face. Unfortunately, there was a social worker that he had that did not believe in him because he had a prison background. And so basically, when we had our good conversations, he shared with me that once he found out his kids were in the system and mom wasn't anywhere around, he jumped into action, says, "I need to clean up my act," came out and started to do what he had to do. Unfortunately, his past was basically being thrown at him. It got so bad that even it was said, unfortunately, in a court report, that he was a poor excuse for a human being, let alone he would never be good enough to be a dad. So that was taken care of course. Our county didn't allow that to take place, but that was what he was facing. And so he had moments where he was jumping through hoops, and he was doing it, but there were those times where he was really struggling, and I was able to sit down with him, hear him out. And a couple of times where he just like, you know what, I think my kids are better off without me, get it out of the way, get them a good home. And so I didn't try to change his mind. I just listened to him, but I also asked him some very valuable questions, like, what do you think your kids would feel without you? Or what do you think they would do without you? It brought him to tears, and he realized, you know what, I have to fight for my kids. And so him being able to do that, and realized how important he was to his kids, and the kids at the time were having a lot of behavioral issues. And so when he made this choice, he went forward and started to fight for them. They started to see it, particularly his daughter, who was the oldest one. And so she was struggling, as a lot of kids do when they're in congregate care, with her grades and everything else. But as soon as she's seen dad start fighting and being motivated, even against all odds, she was able to turn around her whole perspective, knowing that dad was fighting for her, and that he was there at the visitations and telling her, I'm going to continue going without discussing the case. She turned it around. Her grades went awesome. She ended up getting into sports. I actually was privileged to be able to go and see, how wonderful she was in volleyball. He was a proud father, looking at his daughter just right there, just starting to thrive. And even though it took a lot longer than it should have, he was able to reunify. And so that was a powerful moment for myself, to be able to see what it looked like. I did it a lot of times, but this is one particular one with a father, single father at that, who turned his life around. And the impact was, even his daughter, she graduated on top of that. And so I had a conversation with him, and I asked him, I said, look, I know you wanted your daughter, your kids a year ago, but here we are a year later. How do you feel? Do you think that if you would have gotten your children back then, that it would have lasted and you would have been okay? And his response was, no. Today I realize I'm a different person. I needed this to continue going on. So to be able to see the optimistic side of something that he had to go through, that I was familiar with, was very powerful. And that even to this day, they're still reunified, and it's been already, I believe, 3 years. So it's to me, it's a big victory to be able to see that take place, and above all, to see these kids that we're protecting end up with their families, especially with him being a single father, and such a success that takes place that he can be proud of, that he was a part of. So that's the impact that I've seen, and that's just one of many stories of when fathers are involved in their child's life. And there's statistics out there, but I won't get into that. So thank you.
Well, the notion of separating children from families is a harsh one. And thinking about how we label our parents, but especially our fathers, right? That we often don't see them as part of the unit, part of the healing process. And so when I heard this story yesterday, I kind of teared up, and it has equal impact for me too, because having seen that turnaround, both in dad and the daughter, speaks volumes about keeping families together. Katarina, having spent a good portion of your life in foster care, what can help kids who have experienced child welfare thrive? And what do you like to focus on when you're working with youth?
So as I mentioned earlier, I really believe the power of relationships. And the reason why is that is in the child system, we hear a lot of dogma about trauma, and it's often used to limit the potential of young people and talk about like what trauma does to you, as if it's a perfect state that can never be informative. Like talking about healing. Which is in relationships, and often
Katarina, Katarina, we're having a difficult time hearing you. You're breaking up a little bit. Let me give you a second to, I think there was a space that you were standing in before.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, so I don't know what you heard or what you missed.
Can you start from the beginning, Katarina?
Yeah, so I believe that healing happens in relationships, and I want to shift the focus of all the work we do for young people in the child welfare system to be about identifying, nourishing, protecting, and defending those relationships. And the reason why I say that is because oftentimes when a young person goes to sit in, for example, a child family team CFT meeting, they're in a room of adults, mostly service providers, who are making major decisions about their lives. And even if they're asked their opinion, think about how intimidating it might be to share in a room of people who get to make life-altering decisions about you regardless, right? So I say that I would like to see young people be able to invite who they want to those CFT meetings. And for young people to not be interrupted when they speak, for everyone to create, but also defend space for young people to really be active participants in their case, because they are experts on what's happening to them, right? And I want to see that valued. And I think so often in child welfare, we hear about trauma and what that means for young people and how it affects over the lifetime and all these negative statistics about young people experiencing foster care and what happens when they, quote, age out, when the system decides that they're no longer worthy or worth investing in services, right? And the reality is that I think what we need to do if we want to really transform the world for these young people and let these young people transform the world is to talk about healing and get serious about the ways we can support their healing. So never shutting the door to relationships that matter to them, because maybe that boyfriend is only their boyfriend for a month when they're 13, right? But the way in which we have conversations with them about that relationship and help them develop skills to discern healthy relationships and what that means, that's what lasts a lifetime, right? And those relationships matter, especially thinking about the pandemic, right? What happens when the dorms close and the world's closing if you don't have those relationships and communities to call on? And that's what we saw for so many young people who had experienced foster care who were no longer eligible for extended foster care services, is that it made the difference whether or not they had those community connections and relationships. And what makes the difference in those is how we identify, invest, nourish, protect, and defend those relationships while they're in care.
Thank you, Katarina. And I agree so much that we talk about trauma, but we don't center ourselves on the healing aspect of the trauma that's been imposed on youth and on families and on communities. So thank you for that. Our last question is for everybody. And Bob, we'll start with you. So this gets to sort of the direct, what would it take for a transformed system? But if you had a magic wand that could change the system, what would you change? What would you want people to know so that what you experienced wouldn't be experienced by others? And what your niece experienced wouldn't be experienced by others?
Well, definitely, like what Katarina just said, I'll touch on my niece just for a second. I found out something about a year and a half ago up in Sacramento. She was on a panel, and she said the whole time when she was, before I became the guardian, and she had a caseworker that would come once a month, she never was told how her mom was doing, whether it good or bad. And I never knew that. I looked at her and I was like, wow. She says, I just would have wanted to know what's going on. Everybody's making all these decisions. Everybody's in charge of me, but I had nobody would ever tell me the truth of how my mom was doing, if she was ever going to get me back. So that to me, I think was important to have her involved. We we called it a TDM, team decision meeting. She didn't have a voice. She was there. She didn't have a voice. I remember, and that to me, I think made me think about it when Kat said that. But I think the importance of having people involved in a case or situation, even before there's any service involvement or the child's taken away, that there's some peer-to-peer support or some people with lived experiences that have actually gone through it that can talk to people. I think that might prevent some people from entering the system. I definitely think it will help people that are doing the job to care for this child during, if reunification is a possibility, and it would prevent family relationships from falling apart and the child re-entering. I think it has a lot of good. I would like to see that, and we're working on this right now, is to really have that influence as an equal partner there rather than the agency protecting everybody. And I know that might have to bring some question into privacy issues, but come on, some are good, some aren't. Some of the issues with privacy, but to be able to know and to help people knowing the specific situation. So to me, that's important.
Great, thank you, Bob. Roger?
So for me, if I had a magic wand, which it's funny because I've actually thought about that, and I've actually spoke to some of my parents that I work with. I think the one thing that I would definitely want to bring out is and change for the child welfare system is implementation, whether it's listening, including, or participating. Taking action will make a lot of difference. A lot of programs coming in, a lot of wonderful trainings, but just in a whole, just having it being implemented in a way that families are being able to get the help they needed, along with what Bob says and what Katarina said. So that would be my thing.
Thanks, Roger. Katarina?
Yeah, I think if I had to just make the system as it is, right? I mean, what we know about the history of the child welfare system and how it
Katarina, we're having difficulty hearing you again.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay, so what I was saying is that I would just eliminate the system as it is, because from what we know about the history of the child welfare system and how it continues to reproduce racial and economic disproportionalities and disparities today, is that it's an inherently racist and violent system. And I think this is important to note because we know that we need to keep kids safe, right? But from my experience and so many others that I know, the child welfare system is in no place to keep children's bodies and spirits safe. And we need to really reimagine what safety means, especially when so many child welfare cases are open simply due to economic need, right? And that there are entire zip codes where children are removed simply due to economic need and lack of cultural understanding. And it's really a tragedy to separate families for these things, right? So I want to see a world where we invest in communities, we invest in families, we rethink how we spend child welfare money, right? Which Family First is doing a little of that, but it's also not really the type of prevention I'm talking about. I'm talking about universal childcare. I'm talking about safe homes for every family to live in. I'm talking about food, healthy food in every refrigerator. And I think that's the kind of world we need that would really keep children safe.
You're talking about a child and family well-being system in every community. You're talking about communities of hope. So thank you for that, Katarina. And oftentimes I will say when we were preparing yesterday, Bob said, we often have these conversations and I would like to end it on a happy note and let folks know where we are today, right? In spite of the system that was there to serve us, where are we today? And so I just want to invite Roger, Bob, and Katarina, and we'll start with Bob. Where are you today? How are you doing?
Well, this is the part I'm going to choke up on. Sorry about that. Because what happens in my mind, I go through the process of an 8-year-old cute little girl to a 12-year-old monster to now a 26-year-old college graduate who wants to get into art therapy. And I'm just so happy that it is where it is. It is where it is today. And I think what's important is somebody took an investment, stayed with her, invested in her, and I always tell her this story. I said, honey, I never had to change your diapers, but one day you're going to change mine, and she's going to do it. She's going to hire somebody, but she's going to do it. So, and it's just basically we're the only 2 family members left, and we love each other, even though I never really knew her when she was 8. So to me, it's something I would do over again 100 times. So
she's lucky to have you, Bob.
Thank
Roger?
you.
So after our journey that nearly destroyed my family, I'm happy to say that my wife and I celebrated 18 years of marriage. My daughter is now an adult, and I have 3 beautiful grandchildren that I get to celebrate. We're a lot closer. We did have some struggles going through, but we're still together, and that is the main part. And not only that,
Bravo.
I'm a parent partner. I'm part of the Fatherhood Coalition. I'm a part of speaking to the state on fatherhood awareness and inclusion. My wife and I are in college, and I mean, it's just we're ministers, and we're living life to the fullest despite this thing that happened. And what I can say is that our family is stronger now, even more so, and we're able to give it out to other families. So that's what I want to end on.
Thank you, Roger. Katarina?
First, I wanted to check if you can hear me okay.
Yes, we can.
Great. So I actually got to spend this weekend making a digital story. And what I chose to focus on was the concept of generational healing, because last year I earned my MSW degree from UC Berkeley. And a few days after that, I gave birth to a beautiful baby who's now around 18 months old. And I've really been focused on generational healing, not just in my life and my family, but also in the world and how I actualize this work. So one of the things I've been doing is developing curriculum and programs to engage young parents in a different way. So what does a parenting class look like that's focused on empowering parents and children in their relationships to engage in a generational healing journey, right? Rather than just the basic things that parenting classes cover, how can we actually create parenting classes that reproduce generational healing, right? So how are we actually breaking cycles and defining what hope looks like in families and communities, right? And so that's really what I've been doing, is spending a lot of time in my own life and in my own family investing in our healing for my baby, for my mother, for my grandmother, and for my community too, thinking about what this means for other young people who are experiencing or have experienced foster care or other types of cycles in their family.
Thank you. I want to thank each of you for sharing your time, sharing your stories. I find great inspiration and motivation from having these conversations. And I know that everybody that participated in this session did as well. Thank you all. And I think we're over. We're done with our time. So thank you. We're happy to be here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
All right.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much.